Hello there, 3:20. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studio. I'm Darryl Morris. Hope you're okay tonight. Thank you for your company. Firstly, let's head to Australia, because Australia has elected its first Labour government in almost a decade, with Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, now ousting Scott Morrison's Conservative coalition government. It is a really significant moment, isn't it, in the history of Australian politics. It's a big sea change, and Rachel Brunsden is a radio presenter based in Brisbane and can bring us the details. Rachel, hello there.
Hello, I'm sorry, I'm in Melbourne, but you know, we don't get upset about things like that.
Melbourne's better.
No,
anyway. Melbourne's a lovely
that's
place.
so true. It's a very big deal. We went to bed last night very happy. What Australia has essentially said to the two major parties is, no, enough is enough. We have to have one of you as a minority government, so we chose Labor, and Anthony Albanese's a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. He grew up in the western suburbs, raised by a single mother on a disability pension, so a lot of people can relate to him. They were over the whole ScoMo factor, the Scott Morrison factor. He handled some stuff, especially bushfires and COVID, particularly badly, and his brand was in the tanker. But what we've seen emerge in this election last night was independents have risen, Greens have risen, and in places where you wouldn't think they would, in traditional Conservative seats, Greens have been taking them. And the rise of independents is really important because a lot of them are women. So the community has spoken. We've said we don't want any more political corruption. We want climate change to be a factor that's and it should be worldwide. We want serious action on climate change. And with the Conservative government that we've had, climate deniers were out and about. And we thought, no, we've had enough. So thank goodness we have some sense. But they do have to hold a 76 majority to have a majority government. Labor has 171 seats, but with the independents and the crossbenchers, because they all speak the same sort of moderate language, I think there's going to be a lot of cooperation there.
Okay, so just explain that again then, Rachel. So the sort of the maths of this, that you have to have a 76 majority in order to govern as a majority party.
That's right.
And so what is the makeup after last night?
After last night, Labor currently, they're still counting a lot of postal, but Labor currently have 72. The coalition has 56, and the independents hold the rest. So we're going to have a lot of crossbench activity where we used to have one or two independents. Now you've got 10. So there's going to be a lot of talk across channels. And the great thing about that is that Anthony Albanese's party speaks the same language that a lot of these independents do. They listen to their community. And again, I'm so beside myself with joy because the bulk of them are women. And it's risen because we've got our red party and our blue party, but now we have a teal party. And that's a great thing for us. It's a great thing for women. It's a great thing for Australia. It's a great thing for progress.
Right. You say a teal party. Is that an official party? Or is that just a term that's being used for those?
It's not. When they show you all the results and they show you the red and the blue, they've given them teal for some reason.
Right.
I once associated teal with the colour of gangrene, but we'll get past that. But this is just a sort of a marker that they've given them so we could see on the map what was going on.
Right, okay, fair enough. Okay, and so does that mean that Labour are going to govern as a minority government, but they will rely legislatively on the support of independents who they know are likely to support them on, various key things? So there's not an official arrangement that they've entered into?
No, and I don't think they had those discussions prior because nobody was expecting this to happen. This is unprecedented. It was a bloodbath last night, and so many. For example, our treasurer, who's a very good politician, and it was a shame to see him lose his seat. Josh Frydenberg waved us through COVID really well. He lost his seat. That was a shock, an absolute shock to lose. But because they didn't have these discussions prior, there has been no agreement. But I know that the women in particular who now hold these independent seats are very reasonable and love to talk to anybody about anything that affects their direct community. These people are not about party. They're all about their community, and that's why independents are so important now.
Right, so it feels as though the biggest sea change has been a rejection of the two major parties here then, Rachel. That's the story of this election 2022 has been a rejection of the two main parties. And you say that the independents in particular and the Greens and the independents are sort of speaking the same kind of language as the Australian Labour Party. Why haven't the Australian Labour Party been able to pick up the support that those independents and those Greens where that support has gone to the independents and the Greens, if they're roughly on the same page, speaking the same kind of language?
I think that the feeling in out there, the climate with us the voter, is that we've had enough of the blustering of two majors. So I think that's where they lost. Neither one, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, neither one had a knockout punch in that campaign. Their first debate was an absolute debacle. It was just a screaming match. It was very reminiscent of Trump and Biden. And there just seemed to be no sense and no real hard line. Prior to that, the reason why Labor hadn't been able to keep control and gain government was because they were all over the show with their leadership. They changed leaders as often as they changed the channels on the television. It was ridiculous. And prior to that, the Liberals were the same. So I think we've seen this pattern over the last 20 years and everybody's just gone, you know what, enough. And given the fact that we have to vote in Australia, it's compulsory to vote, everybody was more than willing to get involved in that conversation this time and say, okay, we've been through a pandemic, which we got through relatively okay compared to a lot of other countries. But the floods, the fires, everything that should have been addressed through climate has never been talked about and will not be talked about with a Conservative government. We have got an abundance of renewables in this country, and it's time we started actioning those. Right,
and this is huge, isn't it? This is, I think to understand the story of the political climate in Australia, you have to understand the climate in Australia. And I guess the story of the last few years, and we've been following this, Rachel, in the wee small hours on Talk Radio and Talk TV of, a couple of years ago, those memories of those bushfires will be living long, not just in our memories, but in yours as well, I'm sure.
That was particularly sad, and what was even sadder was that it was completely wiped off the map because COVID happened a couple of months later and everything seemed to be forgotten. But we are a country of extremes. There's fire, there's flood, there's cyclone, we know that about Australia. Why not harness what we have and use it to bring down prices of energy and make renewables a thing where we don't have to rely on coal and damage the ecosystem and then create more of a problem by having more of these natural disasters. Climate's real. That's been proven. Why don't we get our act together and start using what we have and not damaging what we have further?
And Scott Morrison has found himself, Rachel, on the end of a defeat here, electoral defeat here, but some punishing public opinion as well, hasn't he, in the last couple of years?
Yeah, he's not had a great time. His catch cry and unfortunately sound bites, as we all know in media, aren't necessarily reflective contextually of what somebody has said at the time. But he said it's not my job a lot, and that was no good. When the bushfires were on, he was in Hawaii. He said, "I don't hold a hose, mate," in a phone call that was recorded while he wasn't in the country. It's gotten from bad to worse to him. And he's also been very vocal in the past about his feelings about same-sex marriage and how he's anti that. He's a very right-wing guy. And I don't think that's sitting well with a progressive nation, and particularly with millennials all coming up to vote now. Millennials controlled this. They really did. The millennials had their foot on the accelerator and said, nope, we're not tolerating this nonsense any longer, from a guy who won't recognise trans rights. He won't back same-sex marriage. He never did. We have it now, thankfully, in this country, but he was one of those who said, if you don't want to bake them a cake, Mr. Baker, you don't have to. It was just nonsense. So he is walking out, and he's also handing over leadership of that party to somebody else who's frankly worse, and thank goodness not going to be Prime Minister. But he says he's not going to quit politics. He did win his seat. I would have thought it would be time to sort of bow out, and I think he probably will, and there will be a by-election as a result. But, I think we need to wave goodbye to him and his atrocious ukulele playing.
Right. What does a Labour government in Australia look like then, Rachel? In terms of, what do you expect the next couple of years to involve legislatively?
I know exactly what you're trying to say, and I can't say it either.
I'm glad you do.
I think climate's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be straight up front. And I think also we're looking for. I know energy prices around the world are ridiculous, so we'll be focusing on our own backyard there. But I think also we're going to focus on equality with women. We're going to talk. There's an anti-corruption. There's anti-corruption legislation coming because there's been so much just heinous activities going on within the government in the last 9 years. So that's going to be stamped out. But climate's going to be the big deal. And I know that you were talking about President Biden in Japan. Anthony Albanese is heading to Japan for his first big meeting after winning office. Will be with the G4, which is us, India, Japan and the United States, and they're all going to be in a meeting in Tokyo talking about the China threat, talking about climate change, talking about various other things. So that's his first big meeting. It's going to be a big deal. Joe Biden and Anthony Albanese are very similar politicians, and they have a similar agenda. They're all about fair wages. They're all about trade unions. They're all about bring up the little guy, that kind of thing. So that's going to be an interesting meeting for him. He's met him a few times, I believe, but that's going to be a big deal. And for your first meeting out of the deck, that's a big deal. So I think we're going to have an acting prime minister, which is going to be strange for the first week, but then we'll see what he comes back with after that. And of course, and I think we'll also bolster support for Ukraine.
That's interesting. We'll talk more about the Quad they described as, aren't they? The Quad, the Australia, India, yes. Japan, and the US relationship. And as you described there, the new Prime Minister and Joe Biden are slightly better bedfellows. What was the relationship like between Scott Morrison and Joe Biden?
I think it was a little tense. Scott Morrison's a kind of I'm going to try and say this without being vulgar. He's kind of a yes man. He's you can tell he's very sort of, bowy and scrapey whenever he meets an international leader. And it's always been a bit on the nose to me. He was like that with Trump. He's like that with everybody. And I never know quite where he's at with them. He doesn't seem to have any gumption. And I know we're beholden to America because of the ANZUS alliance that we have with New Zealand and the famous triad that we are. Basically, whenever they shout, we go, what? So Scott Morrison is a very conservative. He's one of those fundamentalist Christians, which I've got nothing against. God love you, but he's also pushes his own personal agenda, and I think that has been his downfall. And I don't think that Biden responds to politicians very well that way. I think he wants to know what you think and how you think it and what you're going to do. And can you work together or can't you work together? Because if you can't work together, don't waste my time. Joe Biden's got probably the most terrible, awful job on the planet. He had to walk into a pandemic, and now he's dealing with Ukraine, and it's just a mess for him. But I don't think he responds very well to yes men and to people who are just trying to placate him. I think he finds it a bit obnoxious, and I think he's right.
Oh, very interesting. We'll come back to that, Rachel, because it's going to be a fascinating couple of months as the new government settles in, and a fascinating couple of years as things change or don't, depending on, I suppose, the success of that government. Just briefly, Rachel, before I let you go, there has been a case of monkeypox in Australia. This is the first case, I think, and this is from a traveller returning from the United Kingdom to Australia, isn't it?
That's right. And as I said to one of your producers in the email, I thought, weren't you guys done punishing us when you sent back Kylie Minogue? Apparently not. But we gave you Peter Andre, so fair's fair.
Poor Peter Andre. He's had a hard time lately, as Peter Andre.
Bless him. There's a case in New South Wales and a case in Victoria. Victoria's where I am. But I think it's such a rare disease, and it's not easily contractable it's not another COVID, and I think people are starting to panic when they hear about these diseases that land. They start to panic a little bit, and this is not another pandemic. This is something that is very easily controlled. But yeah, there is one from a UK traveller, and I believe in New South Wales it was also a UK traveller. So keep your pox to yourselves, fellas.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Are there measures then, Rachel? Is there a sort of an effort to kind of? I mean, one of the things that we have learned a lot about in the last couple of years is the ability to, and we've been doing this for a long time. This, of course, public health predates COVID, of course, and the notion of sort of tracing and trying to prevent the spread of diseases, of course, predates COVID. But we have also learnt a lot about our ability to do that in the last couple of years. Is there sort of Australian public health swinging into action to make sure that, to nip this in the bud now?
Yeah, I mean, there was a health alert and said, please don't, if you come into contact with these people, please, isolate yourself. And it's an illness that I think it's a couple of weeks until it tends to sort of wear itself out. They're not very concerned about it here. There's a professor, Peter Sutton. Anyway, he's great. He was looking after Victoria while the pandemic was on, and he's one of these guys who just tells you exactly how it is. And he said, we're not going to have international borders closing. We're not going to do that. Just maintain, your sensible behaviour that we did with COVID, because it's now cold and flu season here. We're in winter. So wash your hands, keep your distance, and this is how you avoid any kind of infection from anybody at all. So the public health and safety measures, I think, from COVID, because they are still in place here, although we don't have mandatory masking, people are just using their common sense. And I think that's going to stop you getting infected from anybody for any reason. So if we can constantly remember, wash your hands, keep your distance, do this, do that, then I think it's going to be okay. I don't think it's going to become a major issue.
Okay, Rachel, for now, thank you. Really nice to talk to you tonight. Rachel Brunsden, who is a radio presenter based in Melbourne, not Brisbane, in Australia for us. We'll return to Australia for sure.